The Stanley Cup Finals are officially underway, and fellas, this series has not disappointed so far. We have complete wizardry, last-minute goals, overtime goals, double overtime goals, and controversial plays that will leave you on the edge of your seat. But through the first two games, which team has looked more impressive, and which team has the momentum moving forward? Well, let's recap the first two games of the Stanley Cup Finals so far to see if we can answer that question. Games 1 and 2 are in the books. Leon Draisaitl grabs the first game for the Edmonton-Oilers in overtime, and then Brad Marchand comes up with a huge performance and response to get the Florida Panthers their first win and tie up this series. But before we get ahead of ourselves and talk about the future of this one, let's go back to games 1 and 2 and recap what happened for both teams. Last year, the Oilers started off their final series with what ultimately was an insurmountable series lead for the Panthers, 0-3, costing them a championship. So to get this win in the first game must have been a huge relief for the players and the fan base. Everything about this game 1 was different for the Edmonton Oilers, from an electrifying start to a captivating finish. An interesting stat from Sportsnet that came out after Game 1 is that the Florida Panthers were 29-0 after leading games through the first 40 minutes. Now after Game 1, they're 29-1 thanks to the Edmonton Oilers' best players. Edmonton would go down 3-1 in Game 1, and it seemed like the Panthers were going to go ahead and take the first game on the road. But ultimately, they were able to tie things up and force overtime. A tough break for Tomas Nosek, who, in an attempt to clear the puck, would send it over the glass to give the Oilers an overtime power play, and ultimately, this would lead to the game winner by Leon Draisaitl. My big takeaway from Game 1 was that Edmonton can compete with Florida, which a lot of people have had some concerns about, especially after they went into that hole last year in the finals. And again, they did come back in that series, but it just feels like they're a different team. McDavid and Draisaitl both had 2 points on the night. Ekholm had a goal, Arvidsson had a goal, they were getting production from their depth, and Stuart Skinner, even though I've criticized him a lot in the past, had a pretty good performance in Game 1. So to get that victory and set the tone for this series, it was huge for the Edmonton Oilers. Now, grabbing that first game was very important, but the Oilers' job was not finished. They had another home game for Game 2 that the Panthers were going to have a lot more motivation and desperation to compete in. Now, Game 2, it was basically Game 1, just with a different ending. The Oilers matched their offensive production, literally shot for shot, giving Sergei Bobrovsky 42 saves in Game 1 and then 42 in Game 2. So that's a crazy stat in itself. I think they said Bobrovsky's the first goalie in the finals to ever do that in the first 2 games, which is really cool for goalie Bob, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But the ending for this game, it felt like Florida they clicked a little bit more than Edmonton towards the end, almost like Edmonton had a bit more fatigue in Game 2 than Florida, and that ultimately is what I think led to them losing that game. Sam Bennett, Seth Jones, Dmitry Kulikov all would score for the Panthers, while Evander Kane, Evan Bouchard, Leon Draisaitl, and of course the big man Corey Perry himself, who tied things up late, would all score for the Edmonton Oilers to force overtime yet again. In the end, though, it was Brad Marchand who would step up and not only grab a goal in regulation, but also be the overtime hero and tie this series 1-1 as we head back to Florida. A lot of people were concerned about Brad Marchand, his health, before the playoffs even started, but it's looking like the gamer, the biggest rat in the league, is still doing his thing even in the biggest moments. Marchand was on a breakaway during double overtime and was able to sneak a backhand shot through Stuart Skinner's legs to get that victory for the Panthers. And truthfully, he was all over the ice in this game and easily was the best player out there. He had a pair of goals like we talked about, but also had some great chances throughout the game, including a prime opportunity where he slid the puck under Stuart Skinner, only to hit the post before it was fished out by John Klingberg to save that goal. This was a huge win for the Panthers as they head back home, trying to put a stranglehold on the Oilers in what could potentially end up being a 3-1 series lead if they can handle business in their own barn. But now that we have the recap set aside, let's talk about some takeaways from games 1 and 2, and then we'll predict the rest of the series and talk about at least game 3. Beginning with the Panthers, I know we briefly just discussed Brad Marchand and what a pickup he's been for the team so far, but I want to talk about this a little bit more. The Panthers made an effort to improve their already deep roster, and it was clear that adding Brad Marchand, while having a little bit of concern because of his injuries, could pay massive dividends come later in the playoffs, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Marchand has now tallied 3 goals in the first 2 games of the Stanley Cup final, and arguably has been their best player. I mean, we're talking about a guy who a lot of people were saying were cashed in Boston, that he wasn't able to be on a top line, let alone be a driving star for a team. And while I do think he's more suited for this role that he's in with the Florida Panthers, I think a lot of people need to understand that these players, the way they train and condition themselves, are going to be able to play late in their careers, especially when you're a guy like Marchand, whose game is just so friendly when it comes to the postseason, because he adds not only his skill onto the ice, but the intangibles that he can provide team. It's something that I think every team around the league would desperately pay for to have right now. The other person I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about was Bobrovsky. I mean, he's already shined in a lot of big moments for the playoffs, but this year, I think he's been one of the more quiet best performers throughout every team, and arguably may just be the best goalie again in the playoffs. Now look, it's obviously very hard to neutralize McDavid and Draisaitl in any way. It's not something that you can just kind of flip a switch and have happen, but I think if the Florida Panthers blue line can just kind of prevent some of the role players or depth from getting in these good opportunities to score, then I think they're going to put themselves in a really good position to win this series. I think people aren't talking enough about how well Florida has looked in these 2 games because the scores are a little bit higher, but I think eventually, especially at home, these guys are going to step up and that Edmonton's going to have a really hard time. And like I said, I have Edmonton winning this series, but I think for what the Cats have done on the road, they've looked pretty impressive through the first 2 games. Flipping over to the Oilers now, obviously we talked a little bit about how the Florida Panthers can go at McDavid and Draisaitl, but I really don't expect them to slow down, and they're obviously the headliners for Edmonton throughout this series so far. They both put up great performances in games 1 and 2, and seriously, watching this pass that McDavid gave to Draisaitl for this goal, it doesn't get much better than that. But outside of those 2 players, what's really the difference from last year? I think, in my eyes, the biggest thing is that they're getting contributions from other players. The Corey Perrys, the Kapanens of the world, even Arvidsson at certain moments, and then especially and most importantly, their defensive players like Bouchard and Ekholm, who have had some pretty timely goals. I think we're seeing an Edmonton Oilers team who on paper may not have exactly the same talent as last year, but when you're watching the games, these guys are a lot more physical and they're a lot more aggressive with how they're scoring goals. Both teams have been evenly matched, and you could argue that either deserve to be up 2-0 right now, but the reality is we're 1-1 heading back to Florida, and I think Edmonton's going to come out a little bit stronger here because they're the more desperate team. The question is, will the Florida Panthers be able to match that desperation? Edmonton is now 0 for 7 on the man advantage during the Cup final after going 19 for 51, which is a 37.3% success rate on the power play through the first 3 rounds. So special teams, depth, and of course desperation are going to be a big driver for this Game 3 matchup. And when I look at both teams, I think that the Edmonton Oilers are the ones who are going to have a little bit of an edge here just based on those 3 things, because they're the team that's not only coming off a road loss, but the team that lost last year and is just going to be playing more desperate throughout this entire series. But on the flip side, Florida has also been great throughout this entire playoff run, and in the finals they've gotten some production from the not so usual suspects like Evan Rodriguez, who has 3 goals, and Eetu Luosterainen, who has a goal in game 1, and Nico Mikkola, who had a goal in game 2. These aren't guys that are typically scoring a lot of goals for the Panthers, but have been difference makers so far. So I think if this trend continues for the Panthers in game 3, I could easily see them winning. It's such a toss-up series right now because these 2 teams are so evenly matched. It's hard to really predict, but I just think that you can't really fabricate desperation. I think the Edmonton Oilers are going to feel a little bit more heat in this one and end up coming out in game 3. But game 4 could be the complete opposite for the Panthers, so we could be heading back to Edmonton tied up as well. It's just that kind of series. Now, look, I know I've been yapping probably for around 10 minutes for this video, but I think it's necessary, man. We're talking about two of the best teams in the NHL, two offensive and defensive powerhouses who have difference makers at every position, and I think that Game 3 is going to be just as exciting as Games 1 and 2, but like I said, I have the Edmonton Oilers winning in this series, and I think that Game 3 is going to be massive for them because you don't want to head into Game 4 giving the series back to Florida and giving them even more momentum, where if they are at home and can just edge out and grab that 3-1 series lead, that they'll be in a great position. That's just not something you want to be in if you're the Edmonton Oilers. But overall, let me know what you guys think about the finals so far. Who do you have winning in Game 3? Who do you have winning this series? How have you felt about Games 1 and 2? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. Thank you guys as always for watching this video. I'm going to have another one out for you after Games 3 and 4. So if you enjoyed this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything I post. And if you guys want to see a further deep dive into both teams, I have some videos right here for you on the screen. So be sure to check those out after this. Again, thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next episode.